Variety theatres were part of British life. Every town had a variety theatres, and they were all called palaces and empires and hippodromes. For instance, there was the Bristol Hippodrome, the Hackney Empire, the Finsbury Park Empire, the Metropolitan Edgware Road. Of course, the ones I've just mentioned were London ones, Chiswick Empire, and I can go on like that. And it was a way of life. People would go once a week, and that was their main entertainment. Very little television. And then television took over. And all these theatres closed down. They became car parks and bingo halls and nightclubs. And later on, they were knocked down and became lots of flats and shopping malls. And it was a way of life that was lost within a short period of time, just 4 years between 1952 and 1956. And I was very lucky that I was in on the end of that, because in my hall I have posters spanning 3 years where I appeared in well over 60 theatres, one after the other, 6 shows a week, week after week, and just Sundays to travel. And on top of that, I was doing a radio series on a Sunday, which would be broadcast the following Saturday. And it was one of the most popular shows ever, so I really had to be back in London. You can imagine, they never planned these tours. It wasn't one town after the other. It would be Portsmouth and Glasgow. It would be Newcastle and Bristol and so on. And we had to travel on the Sunday. And that's the only time the variety acts would meet each other, at probably Crewe Station or somewhere like that. Quite strange days, because during the daytime you would have very little to do. There'd all be the excitement of the 2 shows a night, and then we'd go back to the digs and have a very plain meal and just meet the few people who were staying in the same digs as yourself. But other than that, people didn't know what to do with themselves. Luckily, I had many hobbies and interests, so I kept myself occupied, but others went to the pub and had a few drinks or went to a cinema every day. It was a very strange life. And when the variety theatres stopped, and they faded out very quickly, in fact, the stage newspaper once said 12 of the major ones were closed in 1 week. Of course, when these theatres were built originally, they were very plush. They had gilt plaster everywhere. They were very decorative. They had very heavy velvet red curtains. They had these plush seats. And by the time it was the end of the variety theatres, everything had faded a bit. But once the lights went out and the music started playing, people were in a different world and loved watching all these variety acts. At least one of the theatres was converted into television studios. It was the Shepherd's Bush Empire, which 1 minute was a variety theatre, and then they stripped out all the stalls, seats, and it became the BBC television studio. That's whilst they were building the television centre nearby in White City. And in fact, the street behind the theatre was called Lion Grove, and that was the head office of BBC Television. Well, the opening night for the Shepherd's Bush Studios was a very special occasion, and it was a bank holiday, the 1st of August 1956. And the producer asked me if I could do one of my special stunts to publicise the opening event. And I came out with probably one of the most difficult and most complicated tricks that I've ever done. I remembered seeing a sporting event where they had a split screen. I'd never seen that before. They showed the race course in a corner of the screen, and the other side was a studio. And I asked if that could be done, and I was told it had never been done for light entertainment, but they would get permission to do it. And sure enough, we got permission to use a split screen for my show, and I understand it was the first time ever that it was used in light entertainment. A studio in Manchester was shown, which is about 200 miles from London, and of course we were in the Shepherd's Bush Empire, which is now the BBC television studios. Up in Manchester was a well-known commentator and a newsreader called Peter West. I had asked him to stop the first celebrity that would walk through the door of the Manchester studios and ask him if he would take part. And he had found somebody, a famous cricketer called Cyril Washbrook. They had also invited their local bank manager to be in the studio. They had no idea what I was going to do. We had a link up between the two studios so that Cyril Washbrook could hear me, and I asked him to take out his wallet and take out any notes that he might have. He took out a £5 note, which was a very large white note at that time. He took out a £1 note, which was a medium-sized green note, and he took out a 10 shilling note, which was a smaller brown note. And he put them on the table. And I said, please pick one at random. He decided on the 10 shilling note. I asked him to hand it to the bank manager, who read out the serial number, which was recorded on the blackboard. Then I asked him to fold it into half again, and half again, so it became quite small. And then I had an afterthought. I said, I would like to identify that note, so would you hand it to Peter West, the commentator, who had a pin ready on the table. I said, would you please make a secret pinprick into that note somewhere, but don't show it to anyone. So he turned away, put the pin into the note, then folded it again, and I asked somebody for a cigarette case, which somebody produced with 6 or 7 cigarettes in it. I asked them to take the cigarettes out, put them in their pocket, showed the cigarette case empty, put the 10 shilling note in, and closed it, and then held it between thumb and forefinger in full view of the camera in Manchester. In the meantime, in London, I had 2 people next to me as well. One was the local bank manager that they'd invited to attend, and the other one was somebody that everybody knew. It was a man called Fabian of the Yard, a real detective who had become a television personality. He had his own series, which was called Fabian of the Yard, and in America it was called Fabian of Scotland Yard. Well, he was certainly the right man to have because everybody trusted him. And I asked him to look at a little brass tube. He looked into it, it was empty. He put a little label on. I asked him to initial the label, look at the empty tube again, hold it between thumb and forefinger in his hand. Then, at the last minute, I took it from him, showed it empty to the camera, to the bank manager and to Fabian, asked him to again hold it between thumb and forefinger. Then we travelled back to Manchester, and I said, are you still holding the cigarette case? Yes. I said, well, I'm now going to count to 5. On the count of 5, I want you to open the case. And I counted fairly dramatically, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, open the cigarette case, and they opened it, and there was a surprise because nothing had happened. The 10 shilling note was still folded inside the case. Obviously no reaction from the audience. And I said, of course, I forgot the drum roll. Now in the studio in London, we had a big symphony orchestra, including the timpani drums, these big cattle drums. I said, may I have a drum roll, please? And the drummer started the boom, and I counted more dramatically this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Open the cigarette case, and this time the 10 shilling had gone, and the cigarettes were back. Well, I said, if it's not there, it has to be somewhere. So I asked Fabian in London, and remember, both sides were still on the split screen. Just look at the tube. He said, yes, there's a piece of paper in there. I said, well, push it out. He pushed out the little piece of paper, opened it up, and it wasn't paper, it was a 10 shilling note. I immediately asked him to hand it to the bank manager in London. I said, is that a genuine note? Would you pass it? He looked at it, he said, absolutely. And just before he handed it back to me, I asked Peter West where he had put that secret pinprick. And he said, well, one of the numbers of the serial number was a 9, and I put the pinprick in the centre of the 9. The bank manager in London looked at the note against the light and confirmed that there was a pinhole in the middle of the 9 in the 10-shilling note in London. I then finished by saying, well, I apologise to Cyril Washbrook because I can't magic it back because we are out of time, but I will send it to you in the post, and thank you for your help. I've just been telling you about one of my most ambitious routines that I've ever created, the 10-shilling note that disappeared in Manchester and reappeared in London. Now you may think many magicians have made things disappear and reappear, but the important thing is to have something identifiable, something that only exists in one form, in a unique form. And of course a treasury note has a serial number, and on top of that the pinprick was made secretly. Of course I don't claim anything magical or that any kind of supernatural powers, so most of my routines, and I say most, not all, have a logical explanation. But if you just think about it, nobody was an assistant, or if you want to call them a stooge or a helper, or knew how it was done. Certainly Peter West had no idea how it was done, and he said so many times after that. Also, Cyril Washbrook had been picked at random as he walked through the door. Of course, the treasury note is unique because of its serial number, but on top of that, the secret pinprick that was put in gave it a unique feeling that only that one note existed. It was a very ambitious magical routine, probably the most complicated I've ever done, and I enjoyed talking about it. Well, I'm sure you've got your own theories of how this was achieved, and if it made you think, that's great, because that's what magic is all about.